The Secret Story of Him. Chapter 9. From Prey to Predators. The swamp wasn't alive. It was rotting. Every breath reeked of death, and every shadow crawled with malice. The water, black and stinking, hid both predators and the corpses of those who dared to fight for freedom before us. The air was thick, suffocating, like the swamp itself wanted to choke the life out of us. We weren't just hunted. We were prey in a goddamn nightmare. The first week proved it. Elias led 10 men into the unknown, their job simple: find a way out. But the overseers were waiting, their blades sharp, and their lust for blood sharper. We heard them die before we saw it, screams that ripped through the swamp like jagged glass. When we found them, the sight burned itself into my skull. Elias hung from a cypress tree like some sick trophy. They'd stripped him bare, carved his flesh like he was meat for the slaughter. Blood soaked the bark beneath him, and his eyes, those fierce eyes, stared wide open in defiance even as his body swayed lifeless in the humid breeze. Around him lay the others, hacked apart, gutted like animals, their limbs tossed into the mud like trash. A bloody sign nailed to the tree read, "Runaways." I clenched my fists so hard my nails bit into my palms. Blood dripped down my fingers as I whispered through gritted teeth, "They'll fucking pay." Patwa's hand gripped my shoulder, steady but cold. She didn't say anything. She never wasted words on what didn't need saying. But Michael's death tore something out of me I didn't know I still had left. Michael, the field brother of Elias, had become the plantation's blacksmith. The Jones plantation didn't just own bodies, it owned the tools that broke them. Michael was their craftsman of pain, forging the chains that bound us, the branding irons that burned our flesh, and the blades that cut us down when we dared to rise. His hands, young but calloused and strong, shaped the very instruments of our suffering. For years, he worked in silence, hammering iron into shackles while overseers barked orders and cracked whips just outside his forge. They trusted him because he was good at what he did, too good. Years had passed since Sino first brought us together, and even more since we last exchanged words. But I saw it in him back then, clear as fire, something buried deep, waiting to rise. The way his jaw clenched when they brought him a fresh batch of chains to repair. The way his eyes darkened when they handed him a branding iron and told him to burn their mark into another human being. "Do it," they'd sneer, shoving a trembling child forward. "Or we'll do worse." And he'd do it only because he had no choice. But every time I saw a piece of him die, I hated him for it at first, hated the way he obeyed them, the way he seemed to accept his role in their machine of cruelty. But then I realized something. Michael was their tool. I'd turn him into their ticking time bomb. Rumors cut deep. Rumor has it they're a younger, more better blacksmith, Mrs. Bessie eyeing. He cheaped too, you know she liked them young. I whispered to him for months, "You're no better than them." I spat at him once, my voice low but sharp enough to cut through the noise of his forge. He didn't look at me, just kept hammering away a head-glowing piece of iron. "You think I like this?" he muttered finally, his voice rough as gravel. "I think you're a coward." I shot back, "You've got fire in your hands, Michael. Use it." He stopped, the hammer frozen mid-swing. When he turned to me, his eyes burned brighter than the forge behind him. "You don't know what you're asking," he said quietly. "I do, Michael. I have a plan." For the first time, he listened. He really heard me. Michael was raised to follow Jesus, and his faith ran deep, too deep, if you ask me. We were all taught to bow to their God, the one they swore loved us even as he watched us hang. They baptized us in chains, preached salvation with blood on their hands. They used that Bible like a branding iron, burning obedience into our flesh while calling it grace. We never saw eye to eye on that. I couldn't kneel to a God they gave us, a God that watched us rot in chains, that turned his back as our children were ripped from our arms. Their God didn't love us. He loved them. He blessed their whips and their wealth while we bled and begged for mercy that never came. I shared the stories of our ancestors, the same stories Mama Kalisa had taught me. It created a bond between us, one stronger than either of us expected. Michael became like family to me. When Mrs. Bessie and the overseers were asleep, I'd sneak out of the house. In the shadows of the night, I taught him how to read, and in return, he taught me how to forge iron. When the uprising started, Michael didn't just join us, he'd help lead us. His forge became our armory, his hands crafting weapons instead of chains. Axes, knives, crude spears, and whatever else he could make with stolen scraps of metal and stolen moments of freedom. The night we rose up against them, Michael was a force of nature. He was the voice of it. His shouts of defiance rang out like thunder, rallying the others as he tore through the plantation. He swung an axe like it was an extension of himself, cutting down overseers with a fury that left even me speechless. Just a few weeks after the rebellion, Michael and a small group were out foraging when they were spotted. Though he fought off as many as he could, they eventually overpowered him. Refusing to surrender or retreat, he stood his ground until the end. They gunned him down not because he faltered, but because he refused to resubmit. He died for us all, leading the devil's patrol away from the group, his body absorbing bullet after bullet. Even in death, he didn't fall. He knelt, gripping that blooded axe like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to this world, his blood staining the soil he fought to free. His death wasn't just a loss, it was a fucking tragedy. We're free because he believed. Good morning, Michael. The swamp took 20 more of us after Michael. It didn't care about our pain or our rage. It only cared about survival. And it wasn't ours it was rooting for. Crocodiles slid silently through the black water, their yellow eyes gleaming with hunger as they waited for one wrong step. Panthers prowled the edges of our campsites, their low growls sending shivers down spines already bent under the weight of exhaustion and fear. And then there were the insects, relentless clouds of biting flies and stinging mosquitoes that turned every inch of exposed skin into a battlefield. Fever spread through our group like wildfire. Children cried through swollen lips while mothers tried desperately to keep them quiet so we wouldn't be found. Through it all, Patwa held us together. She moved like a ghost, silent and efficient, tending to the children with whispered songs and cool rags for their foreheads. She didn't stop. Not to cry, not to rest. Her strength was a quiet fire, steady and unyielding. I watched her one night, her hands trembling as she cradled a boy dying of snakebite. You never stop, I muttered. Ain't no time for that, she replied, her voice hard as steel. If I stop, they stop, and if they stop, they die. Her words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. Louisiana was worse. The bodies hung like grim ornaments from every tree we passed. Their faces, twisted and swollen, were etched into my mind. Some I recognized, friends who had left our group days earlier, hoping for safety. Others were strangers, their deaths a warning written in blood and rope. The air stank of decay, a thick, nauseating stench that clung to our skin. Every step forward was a battle against the weight of despair. By the time we reached Baton Rouge, we were ghosts. Starved, hunted, and broken, but alive. Freedom felt farther away than ever. The overseers patrolled the roads with bloodhounds, their torches lighting the swamp like hellfire. The swamp itself seemed to conspire against us, its waters deep, and its predators relentless. But we pressed on. "We can't stop," I told Patwa one night, my voice suave. "Not here, not ever." She nodded, her face emotionless. The swamp had taken so much from us, Elias, Michael, Henry, Lady, and countless others. But it had also forged us, hardened us into something the overseers couldn't break. We were no longer slaves. We were warriors. The days grew darker, the swamp's grip tightening with each step. Food became a dream, a cruel memory of stolen cornbread and scraps. Now we survived on wild roots and water thick with mud. The swamp itself seemed alive, conspiring against us. Trees whispered our names, their branches clutching at us like skeletal fingers. The stench of rotting flesh was everywhere, hanging in the air, clinging to our skin, and festering in the wounds we couldn't afford to let fester. Children whimpered at night, their cries muffled by hands desperate to keep the hunters at bay. We weren't just running, we were bleeding out, inch by inch, soul by soul. One night, while the group rested, I sat apart, staring into the inky blackness. My thoughts drifted to Elias, his booming laugh and unyielding fists now silenced forever. I remembered Michael, whose faith had burned so brightly that even death couldn't extinguish it. Their absence was a hollow ache, a gaping wound that threatened to swallow me whole. But in that darkness, I saw them, ghosts of rebellion, faces painted with rage and sorrow. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. Their eyes burned into me, a reminder that I carried their fire now. I swore silently to them, to the swamp, to the stars, I will not falter. I will not stop, not until every chain is broken. Patwa, as always, was the anchor holding us together. Even as the swamp tore us apart, she never broke. I found her one morning, leaning against a tree, her face gaunt and pale. She was cradling a child who had stopped breathing in the night. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply dug a shallow grave with her bare hands, her fingers bleeding and raw. When she was done, she stood and turned to me. "Let's go," she said, her voice steady. I wanted to tell her to rest, to grieve, to stop pretending she was made of stone. But I didn't, because I knew she couldn't. As we entered the swamps of Baton Rouge, we were no longer a group of runaways. We were a battalion of the damned, hardened by pain and fury. The overseers were closing in, their hounds snarling, their torches lighting the swamp like a second sun. But they didn't see us, not the real us. They didn't see the rage bubbling beneath our silence, the defiance in our hollow eyes. They thought they were hunting prey. What they didn't realize was that they had cornered wolves, and wolves bite back. The swamp was deathly quiet as the hunters closed in, their torches casting flickering shadows across the trees. The hound's snarls cut through the silence, echoing like the toll of a bell. We crouched low in the underbrush, hearts pounding like war drums. Patwa signaled with her hands, a simple gesture to scatter. The children were already hidden, buried beneath piles of leaves and moss, their tiny breaths barely audible. The rest of us gripped makeshift weapons, sticks sharpened into spears, jagged rocks tied to branches, anything we could wield. The overseers thought they were chasing cattle. Tonight, they would meet wolves. The first clash came swift and savage. A hunter stumbled too close to the underbrush, his torch lighting our path. I lunged from the shadows, the crude spear in my hand driving into his gut. He gasped, his torch falling into the muck as his blood gushed over my hands. I twisted the weapon, rage and desperation guiding my movements. His screams brought the others running, their boots thundering through the swamp. Behind me, Patwa erupted from the darkness, swinging a broken tree limb like a club. It connected with a hunter's skull, the sickening crack cutting through the chaos. But for every hunter we took down, two more emerged. They came in waves, shouting curses, their rifles firing blindly into the dark. A shot rang out, and I turned to see Jacob, a boy no older than 14, crumple to the ground. His chest was a ruin, blood pouring from the jagged hole. I wanted to run to him, to carry him to safety, but there was no time. Another hunter was on me, his knife slashing through the air. I blocked with the spear, the blade glancing off the wood, and drove my knee into his groin. He fell with a howl, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. My hands found a rock, and before I knew it, I was smashing it into his face over and over until there was nothing left but pulp. Patwa screamed my name, and I turned to see her locked in a brutal struggle with a hunter twice her size. He had her pinned against a tree, his hands wrapped around her throat. I charged, my spear raised, but before I could reach them, she spat in his face and drove a hidden knife into his neck. Blood sprayed across her, but she didn't flinch. She shoved him off and turned to me, her eyes blazing. "Keep moving," she shouted. "Don't stop." But how could we? The swamp was a battlefield, and the hunters kept coming. By the time the sun began to rise, the swamp was painted red. Bodies lay scattered among the trees, both ours and theirs. The children had been spared the worst of it, but we paid the price. Patwa was bleeding from a deep gash in her side, her steps faltering as we pressed on. We had won, if you could call it that. The hunters were dead, but so were many of us. Jacob, Henry, and Ruth, they were gone, their names added to the growing list of ghosts that followed us as we stumbled through the swamp, the cries of the survivors mingling with the moans of the dying. I realized something. Freedom wasn't a destination. It was a battlefield, and we were still fighting. As blood painted the swamp, not just on the leaves or in the black water, but in the air itself, metallic and thick enough to taste. Standing over what remained of the overseer who'd strung up Elias, I watched maggots already writhing in his shattered skull. Nature was reclaiming the one thing he believed made him superior and us inferior, his white skin. His blood still dripped from my hands, yet I felt nothing, not victory, not relief, only a cold emptiness where my soul used to be. They gathered around me, silent, afraid, waiting, watching. I wasn't a slave anymore. Hell, I wasn't even human. I was him. And I would rise. We would rise. Just like the goddamn sun, inevitable and burning. The part of me that begged, that wept, that hoped died when I put old dirty dog John in the ground. What stood in its place was something else entirely. Something forged in fire, baptized in blood, carved from vengeance. I am America's bastard son, born of her sins. As Mesa and Elijah gathered the children, Patwa and Ida placed the overseer's severed head on a pike at the swamp's edge, a warning to those who would follow. In those moments, I realized the true burden of freedom was only death.
You've been listening to The Secret, story of him from enslaved to the grave, the man who freed more slaves than Harriet Tubman. Chapter 9, From Prey to Predators. Thank you for walking with us through this chapter. A story of transformation, vengeance, and black power reclaimed. If it moved you, honor it. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Drop your truth in the comments. Your voice is part of the revolution. Chapter 10 is next. Tap the link to keep the fire burning. Support the mission. Cash App, My You Time. This isn't just history, it's resurrection. Thank you for your support.